From Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford, this is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. If it's safe for you to do so right now, close your eyes. Imagine you're in a busy restaurant kitchen. You can hear the sharp hiss of a pan hitting high heat and the rhythmic chop of a knife on a cutting board. You can smell something citrusy in the air, and oh yes, onions and garlic simmering in butter. Now reach for the salt without looking. Taste the sauce without seeing the spoon. Adjust the heat without watching the flame. Could you do it? Christine Ha can, and she does it so well that in 2012, she became the first and only person who's blind to win Gordon Ramsay's cooking competition, MasterChef. Since then, she's opened award-winning restaurants and written a New York Times best-selling cookbook. You'll hear how she's learned to trust her instincts and her senses in ways most of us never consider. And speaking of instincts, we'll also hear from world-renowned poet Edward Hirsch. He's been losing his vision due to a hereditary eye disease, but instead of isolating himself, he's been embracing curiosity and finding the expanding of his other senses exhilarating. But let's get back to Christine Ha's story. One day in the late 90s, when she was just 20 years old, she noticed that her vision became kind of blurry. She thought maybe it was a dirty contact lens. But it wasn't. A few days later, she was in a doctor's office, and then another, and there were blood tests, MRIs, even lumbar punctures. Eventually, they figured out it was neuromyelitis optica, or NMO. That's a rare autoimmune disease similar to multiple sclerosis, but it attacks the optic nerves and spinal cord. In Christine's case, for a few months, it paralyzed her from the neck down and robbed her of her vision gradually and then suddenly. After physical therapy, her paralysis relented and she could walk again, but her vision never improved. So with all this going on, at what point did cooking come into her life?
Cooking was not something I grew up loving to do. My parents were Vietnamese immigrants. They were refugees, actually, that escaped Saigon right before the fall of Saigon in April 1975. And so I was born in Southern California some years later. And growing up, I ate a ton of Vietnamese food that my mom would cook at home. She and my dad missed their homeland. So, of course, she cooked a lot of comfort food from her country. So I took advantage of that and just ate it growing up, not thinking that I would ever need to really learn to cook it myself because I thought I would have my mom around forever. But she unfortunately passed away when I was 14, didn't leave any recipes behind, nor did she teach me how to cook. So when I went to college, I realized after moving out of the dorms after my first year that I had to teach myself to cook because I didn't have the dorm cafeteria food to rely on anymore. I didn't want to eat fast food all the time, and I couldn't eat out all the time because I couldn't afford it. So I figured the only way to sustain myself was to learn to cook. And I did miss my mom's cooking because I hadn't had it in so many years. So I just bought a few Vietnamese cookbooks and just read the recipes and then tried cooking in the kitchen by following these recipes word for word. And of course, I botched a lot of dishes at the beginning, but eventually I was able to cook something that my friends and roommates actually found not only edible, but delicious. And there were no leftovers. Nothing went into the trash. And I remember at that time, I still had vision. And I remember looking around the table and seeing all of my friends' happy, satiated faces. And that really brought a sense of joy in me that I think now looking back, I realize that there is something so fulfilling about being able to create something and serving other people and having them enjoy my creation. And that's what initially started the joy of cooking in me. And I just kept at it. And coincidentally around this time, I experienced my first vision loss in college. So I started losing my vision slowly in one eye first and then in both eyes. And so I knew that cooking was not something I wanted to give up because I'm a very independent person and wanted to keep being able to live independently in spite of vision loss. So I had to keep teaching myself over and over how to start again with cooking, trying to figure out the stove, all these basics over and over as I lost more and more vision. So I just kept at it and kept wanting to feed not only myself, but my friends and family. And I eventually got to a place where, in spite of the vision loss, I was able to adapt. with some new techniques that I use in the kitchen with my remaining four senses. And eventually I was cooking just as well, if not better than I was when I did have sight.
See, here's the thing that blows my mind at this point. You could have continued feeding your friends and family, making food, but it could have been like mac and cheese out of a box. It could have been SpaghettiOs. I'm giving my preferences away here. But you didn't stop there. You wanted to continue growing your craft. What is it in you that went that direction?
That is a good question. I like to challenge myself because I believe challenging yourself helps you grow. And it's sometimes painful, but in the end, you come out a better cook, a better writer, a better leader, a better whatever it is that you're striving for. So for me, cooking was just something I really, really enjoyed. And I just wanted to keep getting better. And I just voraciously wanted to learn about different ingredients, different cuisines, techniques, whatever it may be. And at that point in my life, it was something that helped me kind of escape my reality and feel proud that in spite of whatever I was going through, I was able to still put a meal on the table that was good.
So speaking of mastering things, you got it in your head to apply to be on MasterChef. And that was season 3 in 2012. Will you walk me through that decision, please?
Yes, this decision actually kind of fell into my life as well. So after graduating undergrad, I had moved back to Houston from Austin, and I was working a corporate job in oil and gas accounting, and then dealt with all these health issues. So what turned into a few days leave turned into short-term leave, which turned into long-term disability leave. And then eventually I resigned from that position. And as I was dealing with all these health issues, I was trying to figure out what my next chapter in life was. I knew that working in the corporate world wasn't fulfilling for me at that time. I felt like with all of the stuff I was dealing with, I thought there was something that should be more fulfilling in my life, because I didn't know if I would, how long I would live or how my life would be. So I did a lot of soul searching during that time. And I'd mentioned I love books. And the only thing that really helped me through that time, besides visits from friends and family, were listening to audiobooks. And that helped me rediscover my love for literature. So I decided, after I regained full use of my hands and my feet, even though I did not have my vision back, I decided to go back to school for a master's in creative writing. So I decided to go back to school for creative writing. This was as I was losing more vision, and I had just learned to use a white cane to get around. I learned how to navigate the public transportation system in Houston to get to campus. I learned how to read Braille, use a screen reader to get my work done on my computer for school. And it was in my last semester of grad school that I had this opportunity to audition for MasterChef. The casting department actually reached out. I had a blog at that time called theblindcook.com, but I like to be very anonymous. So I never put my name on there. I never put my picture. So I think people that would read the blog, they didn't know exactly who I was or if I was a real person. And the casting department reached out and said, "Hey, it looks like you really love to cook. Do you want to come audition for the show called MasterChef with Gordon Ramsay?" And at that time, I had heard of the name Gordon Ramsay, but I wasn't really sure who he was. I remember going to my husband and telling him, like, "Hey, there's this show called MasterChef with some chef named Gordon Ramsay. Should I go and audition?" And he said, "Heck yes." So I went to the open call auditions with my dish. And if anything, I thought I would maybe just get through 1 or 2 rounds of auditions, maybe get to the auditions that they televise, but not make it all the way. And I thought, if anything, I would have a fun time and an interesting experience and maybe meet Gordon Ramsay. And then I would have a basis for a humor essay or a short story. So I really did it for the creative writing aspect, and ended up going far on that season and winning. And that's kind of what launched the culinary opportunities in my life.
That reminds me of the interesting push and pull of your personality, because on the one hand, as you've said, and as you've demonstrated, like, you pay attention to detail. You're a very determined person. Like, you know yourself really well. And at the same time, there's this one scene in MasterChef where you're presenting your apple pie. And you are self-conscious and you're worried. You're really concerned about whether you did it right or not. And your emotions are right there on the surface, and he is telling you,
You've got to start believing yourself more. Okay? Come on. Come on. Right. Hear that?
Yes, Chef.
There's not a soggy patch on there.
So I'd like to hear about what being on MasterChef did for your confidence. Because on the one hand, you already are confident. And on the other, winning this was not part of the plan. It wasn't necessarily even a priority in your life to focus on making food.
I believe that MasterChef did wonders for my self-confidence. And the fact that I couldn't see became an advantage because I was no longer feeling like I was necessarily competing with other people because I had no idea what they were doing or cooking at their station or what techniques they used or what sort of knife skills they had. I was sort of at that point just going along and thinking, okay, just be a better cook today than you were yesterday in this MasterChef kitchen. So I just kind of stuck to what I knew. And I realized at the end of the day that these chef judges have eaten some of the best food in the world, and I'm not going to be able to create something that is the most amazing bite they've ever had. So I stopped trying to impress them in that way. But I started thinking, let me just impress them with the foods that I love to cook and I love to eat and foods that I would want to make for guests that come into my house or my friends and my family. And I think that's when I started doing better. And that's when the judges started telling me that this is where my confidence should lie and this is where my abilities are. And I really took their advice, played to my strengths, did as much as I could to minimize my weaknesses. And I think that's just when my trajectory on MasterChef took off, as well as my confidence in myself.
Will you take me to the finale? You've made it further than you thought you would. And here you are. In a way, I can imagine that because you were going through this process with sort of an open mind, like, hey, listen, I'm just here for whatever's going to happen. I'm going to write something cool about this. And, no harm, no foul if I don't win. You really weren't invested. You weren't putting your whole life into winning MasterChef. But then here you are. They say the winner of MasterChef is
Christine!
What was going on in you when you heard your name?
I was in shock. I remember for 36 hours after that moment, it did not sink in for 36 hours. I just remember feeling like it was all a dream. It was very stressful filming the season. We were sequestered from home. We had to live in hotels. I didn't get to talk to my family much at all. So all of us were homesick. So I remember the first thing that went through my head when Gordon said my name was first shock, then relief that this whole thing was over. And I still didn't even really process if I'd won. I was just like, the finale's done. Like, we'll be able to go home soon. We're going to get our cell phones back. So I think that those were the very first thoughts that went through my head after Gordon had said my name.
That was Christine Ha. She's best known for becoming the first and only blind contestant to win Gordon Ramsay's reality competition show, MasterChef. But she's also launched 3 restaurants and written a New York Times best-selling cookbook, Recipes from My Home Kitchen, Asian and American Comfort Food. When we get back, Christine talks about some of her favorite sounds in the kitchen.
It would be the sound of the dishwasher closing and turning on, which means I'm done.
Plus the poet Edward Hirsch on how everyday tasks changed as his vision loss progressed.
Going to the post office, not that interesting. But going to the post office when you can't see very much, actually sort of an adventure.
I'm Kyone Wolfe. This is Audacious. Stay with me. This is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. Picture this. You're in a room filled with television cameras and bright lighting. You're surrounded by strangers and celebrity chefs, including Gordon Ramsay, and everyone is cooking. The heat is rising in more ways than one. The judges are watching intently, and you are trying to make the perfect dish. Now, imagine doing all this without your vision. That's the reality Christine Ha faced when she walked into the MasterChef kitchen, and she walked out the winner. But Christine didn't just win a cooking competition, she built a writing career, opened multiple restaurants, and proved that blindness doesn't have to be the end of the story, but the beginning of an even greater one. Back to our conversation. Will you describe today what your vision is like?
If you were to imagine yourself standing in a very, very thick fog or in the middle of a cloud, or if you were to have just come out of a very hot shower and you looked into the steamy mirror, that's what my vision is like. So everything is very hazy. I can see some contrast of color. So if for example, in my kitchen, I'll use a dark colored cutting board on top of my counters, which are a light color. So I can see the perimeter of the cutting board. But everything is very, very blurry. Imagine, like if I was just walking through a cloud all day, every day. And that's my vision.
I'd like to hear about some technologies that you use in the kitchen, from contrasting colors to maybe some inventions that I've never even thought of. Will you talk me through some that come to mind?
My friends joke that I was born to be visually impaired because I'm extremely organized, and I have been all of my life. Like since I was in middle school, my closets have been immaculately organized, from, shirts here on this rack, pants here, all in a color order. Like I use the Roy G. Biv. So all my life I've been like that. And my kitchen is no different. Everything is organized in a way where I know immediately where everything is, even though I can't see. My spice rack is alphabetized. All of my knives are hanging on a magnetic strip in order from smallest to largest knife. And everything has its place. And so for me, organization is key. But small things in my kitchen that I would say have changed since I've lost my vision are the first thing I can think of are these things called raised bump dot stickers. And there's something that you can just order online through Amazon or something, but they're just these tactile stickers that are raised. And my husband put them on the appliances that I use frequently that have like touchscreen or flat screen panels that operate the machine, or on our stove knobs. He'll use it to mark the medium flame level or medium heat. And I just have to align the knob to the raised bump dot. So there are more tactile elements to my kitchen. And on my liquid measuring cup, he used Sugru, which is like this moldable silicone putty thing that he'll put on like the half cup marker on the liquid measuring cup. So I can fill up the cup with liquid and use my fingers to match up the inside with the outside of what I'm feeling. So if I feel the liquid come up to my finger level where I know on the outside I'm touching the raised Sugru element on my cup, then I know, okay, this is half a cup of liquid. So there are little things like that I would say are adaptations that we made in the home kitchen. But otherwise, I've just managed to learn how to do everything with less sight, but it really stems to organization.
The producer of this episode, Jessica Severin DiMartinez, came up with a lot of questions that we're talking about, but two that I particularly love was, she wants to know if you could bottle one smell or sound from your kitchen to carry with you wherever you go, what would you choose and why?
Okay, smell, I know immediately. It would be the smell of shallots and mushrooms browning in butter. That's the smell. Oh, actually, though, I also love the smell of bread baking. Sound-wise, it would be the sound of the dishwasher closing and turning on, which means I'm done.
And she also wants to know, if you had to create a dish based entirely on sound, where each ingredient is chosen for the noise it makes when cooking or being eaten, what would that dish be?
I think for me, a really satisfying sound is something searing. Something about the sound of something searing. It could be chicken with the skin on. It could be pork skin, if you're making like pork belly with the skin on, or a piece of steak, or even if you're searing certain vegetables. If you get the pan really hot, and then just a little bit of fat in it, whether it be oil or butter, and then you sear something, that sound is just really satisfying. And then that sound always immediately emotes, I think, just your mouth watering, because then immediately after that, you start smelling what it is you're searing. So I feel like I would create a dish that is based on having to sear both vegetables and a piece of protein. But then I don't know, but I feel like I always try to make questions harder than they really should be. So I also love music. So I'm like, I would need more time to think about that, but I would want to be able to do something that's kind of a metaphor for like sounds of certain instruments or something. And I would have to think more thoroughly, like, you know, what instrument sound do I love, or what song? And then how do I turn that metaphor into something that's gastronomical? So I would need more time on that. But initially I just think of like the sound of something searing. So I think I would want to char something either on a hot pan or on a grill.
What would you like your last meal to be?
Oh, I know this one immediately. So it's going to be multi-course. I'm going to start off with some really amazing sushi. I love salmon belly. So it'll be that as my first course. Then I'm going to have a side of French fries. Then I'm going to also follow that with some Vietnamese egg rolls from my mom's recipe that I reverse engineered after she'd passed away. Then I'm going to eat a slice of New York style cheese pizza. Then I'm going to eat some Southern fried chicken. And then I'm going to follow that all with a bowl of Vietnamese noodle soup.
And that may be what actually kills you. All of it.
Possibly, but worth it.
Worth it. Okay. What are some ways that people who don't have visual impairments can be more accommodating for you?
I think if you see someone who's visually impaired that's by themselves struggling to find something or cross the street, I love it when someone just comes up and says, oh, excuse me, do you need guidance or help crossing the street or finding a place? And oftentimes that I find really helpful. When you guide someone who's visually impaired, don't grab their arm or their shoulders or grab them. You just let them take your arm or your elbow. And then when you go through a door or like a tighter space, you don't put them first. You just move your arm behind your back. And usually that's a cue for the visually impaired person to know to fall behind you and follow you through whatever it is that you're trying to get through. So I would say that's kind of a few things that I always offer up as etiquette for how to treat or guide someone who's visually impaired.
At this point, you have lived longer with a visual impairment than without it. I wonder if you could go back in time to that day where you thought your contact lens was kind of blurry and messed up, and maybe give yourself some perspective. What would that perspective be?
I would first acknowledge that, yes, this is hard and this will be a big challenge that could affect the rest of your life. But like surviving the experience of having mom pass away when you were a teenager, you will survive this and learn to be a more compassionate, understanding, stronger person. And you know that you will be able to persevere through anything if you know that in the end, your life will be just dandy in spite of this vision loss.
Well, Christine Ha, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you.
Christine is hard at work on her second cookbook, a celebration of the Vietnamese dishes she grew up with, blended with bold new recipes that are entirely her own. We'll have a link to her work at ctpublic.org/audacious. When Edward Hirsch wrote an opinion piece for the New York Times entitled, "I am going blind, and I now find it strangely exhilarating," the responses from readers were kaleidoscopic. Some people praised his courage, his vulnerability, and his ability to find beauty in something so many people fear. Others expressed versions of, "Good for you, but that's not how it feels for me." And another one of those responses was us inviting him onto our show to tell us about the story of his blindness. Edward Hirsch is the president of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation in New York and the author of many highly acclaimed books of poetry and nonfiction. He's spent his life exploring words, art, and human connection, and now he's exploring what it means to see the world as his vision fades. He starts us off with the titular poem from his most recent collection, Stranger by Night.
Stranger by Night. After I lost my peripheral vision, I started getting sideswiped by pedestrians cutting in front of me almost randomly, like memories I couldn't see coming as I left the building at twilight, or stepped gingerly off the curb, or even just crossed the wet pavement to the stairs descending precipitously into the subway station. And I apologized to every one of those strangers jostling me in a world that had grown stranger by night.
Thank you for that. Will you back me up to the moment when you realized something wasn't right with your eyesight?
The moment that was most startling, I suppose, was I was in a movie theater and I went to the restroom. And when I came back into the theater, I could see the screen, but I couldn't see any of the seats. I couldn't see any of the people in the seats. I couldn't see the aisles. I knew they were there, but I could not see them. And so I couldn't return to my seat. I just stood in the back of the theater and watched the film until my partner thought, he's been gone a long time. And she came and got me.
What was going on in your mind when that was happening, when you were sort of stuck there in this strange limbo? Were you thinking there's something wrong with your eyes? Were you thinking there's something wrong with your brain, with your consciousness?
No, I knew there was something wrong with my eyes. First of all, my mother had retinitis pigmentosa. Secondly, my younger sister, by just a year, she has retinitis pigmentosa. So I sort of knew right away, this is what it is.
And what was that like to know that's what this is? Like, and on the one hand, you know that's what this is, and that's kind of good, right? And on the other hand, crap.
Exactly. I didn't do anything. I just went about my business because there's no cure. And then I forgot about it.
So what made you get, an official diagnosis?
During the pandemic, I lost a tremendous amount of my eyesight, but I didn't realize it. I was teaching at NYU, but I was teaching on a laptop. My peripheral vision is probably the size of the laptop, so I could see all my students. I couldn't see at night, but we didn't go anywhere at night. No one did. I took long walks in the daytime, but no one was out. And so I was walking through a residential neighborhood. There was no one there, no traffic, no problems. So I was sort of aware of things. I could see that I couldn't see beyond the computer, but didn't affect me much. Then I came back to New York. And one day I went to the subway. It was sunny. I walked down the stairs. I couldn't see anything. So I climbed out of the subway. I was really upset. And things started happening. I would go to work and I'd come around the corner, I'd bump into people. And then I started running into people on the street. As traffic got to be more and more, people would cut in front of you. I mean, people in New York City are not that nice.
You don't say.
Exactly. So people cutting in front of me all the time. I was bumping into them. I was apologizing, as I said in my poem. And then I thought I should see the retinitis pigmentosa specialist at Columbia, but he wouldn't see me unless I got an official diagnosis. So he recommended a doctor, an eye doctor. I went to see the eye doctor, Royce Chen, and he said he thought I should get an official diagnosis, that I was now legally blind, but I should be officially diagnosed as legally blind. So that's when I called Lighthouse, and they began to help me.
And Lighthouse Guild is an organization that helps people who are affected by vision loss. And you'd written, I've learned that you first need to publicly identify and acknowledge your disability. Then you must acknowledge to yourself and others that you need help. And finally, you must be willing to accept the help that is offered. I'd like to hear about how you accepted help that was offered.
First, I was in denial the way everyone is. And then I learned that some people never get past that. many people, I also learned just the way they handle this is by not going out much anymore. They completely withdraw. At first, I just called Lighthouse. I wanted to get a cane. I wanted a recommendation on what kind of cane to get. And they said, no, we're going to actually give you a full diagnosis and give you an evaluation, and you need much more than a cane. But there's a lot of shame attached to all disabilities, and there's certainly shame attached to this one. But in order to keep the life I had, or anything of the life I wanted to keep, I actually had to adjust, that it wasn't going to work to just pretend it wasn't happening. You had to either withdraw or you had to go forward. And I could no longer just pretend it wasn't happening, which I had been able to do for a long time. I was just faking it. But at a certain point, I was no longer able to fake it. So I had to decide, for example, do I still want to travel on my own? Do I still want to give poetry readings? Do I still want to give lectures? Do I still want to be the president of a foundation? Because if I do, I have to adapt. I can't pretend this isn't happening. I can decide I don't want to do those things anymore, or I can decide that I want to, but I'm going to have to figure it out. So this was the process of recognition that first you need to acknowledge that you need help. Then you have to go get the help. And then you have to admit that you need people to help you. And that's a process. And for me, it's worked out tremendously well. It's enabled me to keep going in a way that I wanted to.
One of the things that you heard early on was you don't look blind. And part of how you can not only get through the world in a safe way, but to be identified as someone who is blind is to have that cane. After getting diagnosed and confirmed by the state, you got some free services, which included like a cane coach. Will you tell me about that?
Love my cane coach. Yes. Now my wife, then my partner, gave me a cane years ago, but it was too small. And I asked Lighthouse and they go, yeah, that's a tap cane. And those are out of date. No one taps anymore. So once I was legally diagnosed and the state of New York diagnosed me and I was put into a program called Job Save, this qualified me for someone to train me. There's actual people who are trained in this, in mobility, and she trained me in how to use a cane, which is sort of intuitive, but not entirely. First, she just showed me the technique, and then we started walking through the streets together, sweeping the cane and getting yourself into situations, going downstairs, going upstairs. Partly using the cane, the coach was training me for when I lose more of my eyesight, because my eyesight is continuing to deteriorate. It seems like a good idea to learn things when you have more sight so that you can then adapt when you have less sight. And I highly recommend that. You can wait, but if you're totally blind, it's much harder to learn these things. It's much easier to learn them when you have some sight. So I was fortunate that I had this coach who took me through all kinds of situations. We started meeting at rush hour so that you could walk when it's really crowded. We walked when it was raining, which makes it much more difficult because people have umbrellas and are running around all around you. Our sessions were really very helpful to me in terms of learning the technique and paying attention, which is really what you have to do when you're walking with a cane.
You also wrote, now that I signal my disability with a white cane, I find that I've tapped a well of visible kindness.
When you bump into people, they get really, really angry. And they look at you and they go, what's wrong with you? And once on the street, a woman started screaming at me as if I bumped into her on purpose. People in lines at the grocery store get really, really mad at you if you're like looking for your credit card or you can't see where to put your credit card, or they think you're just a fool or you're dithering. But in any case, they're extremely hostile. And the airport especially, whoa, if it takes you a while to get something done, like find your ID, put it in the right place, stand in the right place, people are moving around. People are really, really angry. I discovered when you take out a white cane and you signal that you have a disability, the whole world changes. And when you bump into people, which you still do, they apologize to you rather than you apologizing to them. And then people start helping you. Or people go out of their way. They go, can you see your way across the street? Or your shoes are untied. Or really funny one, excuse me, sir, but you may not know that you're standing in front of a fire hydrant. Because if you don't see, you just walk into all kinds of stuff. And my disability, I live in two worlds because I can still see somewhat central vision in the light, but I cannot see almost anything in the dark. So if there's a light in front of me, I can see, but if there's no light, like in the dark, I can't see anything. Like in a blackout, I'm completely blind. So I really need more help then. And when they turn out all the lights in, say, a plane, or when you walk on a plane and they close all the windows because of the heat, I can't see anything. But I found that if you have a cane, people are really nice to you. And I used to go through the world sort of half paying attention because I'm thinking about poetry or my intellectual life or what I'm reading or whatever you're doing, my job, whatever, your life, your friendships, whatever. You're just sort of wandering around. But when you're going blind, you can't afford to do that. You actually have to pay attention to everything every minute. Like if I put down a black pen on a black surface, I will not see it again. And I will have to spend like 7 minutes looking for my pen. If I stop using my cane and I just start daydreaming, walking on the sidewalk, I will walk into something. So it's sort of Zen. You actually have to pay attention. And I found that I'm much more in there. This is sort of the plus side. I really am much more focused, much more paying attention to what I'm doing, much more alert, and much more alive to what's happening at any given moment. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had a tremendous amount of shifts in perspective as you've been dealing with this. And even the title of your New York Times essay last year is "I'm Going Blind and I Now Find It Strangely Exhilarating." You also wrote, "I once felt that I would rather die than go blind. Now I feel the opposite." I feel like I want to assume that though you would rather not have this condition, you also sound like you are profoundly grateful for what this condition has done for you. Or maybe a better way to put it is what you have decided to do with this condition.
I mean, if you ask me would I rather have my eyesight, the answer would be yes. There are a lot of things I can't do that I would like to do that I used to be able to do. That's just true. For example, I love museums and love paintings. It's really hard to go to a museum now. It's not that I can't do it. So I don't mean to be Pollyanna-ish about this and to suggest to anyone that it's not better to have your full sight. But as I said in my piece, I've decided to choose curiosity over despair. And many people with disabilities just choose despair. My attitude is not for everyone. Some people get mad at my attitude. They don't like it. It pisses them off because there's a lot to deal with. But I guess I've begun to see or have seen the other side of this, which is tasks that used to just seem totally deadly to me or boring, or I just didn't want to do them. All kinds of things in daily life are suddenly interesting. Like going to the post office, not that interesting. But going to the post office when you can't see very much, actually sort of an adventure. You got to like go through all the people and then you go like, where do you buy the stamps? And then can you see the stamps? And are you buying the right ones? And all of it's interesting. And so the world is like the Russian formalists used to call it estrangement in novels, that like the world becomes more interesting because it's estranged. And I would say that daily life, which I used to have a slight contempt for, now is very interesting to me because I'm very focused on all of it. And you can't take anything, as you lose your sight, you no longer can take anything for granted in terms of how you move through the world. So this has made me much more alert. I'm sure this is some kind of psychological compensation for what I'm losing, but it's an interesting one to me. I can't see as much of what's going on around me, but I have many more entertaining encounters with people and much more odd encounters because of my eyesight. Like the other day I was on a subway and someone offered me a seat and I said, thank you. And my wife, who was sitting down, said, yeah, you're thanking the wrong person. Okay. Then I thank someone else. He goes, yes, she didn't offer you a seat either. So I just said, thanks to everyone on the subway car who offered me a seat.
That was the poet Edward Hirsch. After the break, what advice does he have for people with vision loss?
If the choice is denial or stopping doing the things that you love, or admitting you have a disability and going forward to be able to do the things you love, then lean in.
I'm Kyone Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay tuned. This is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolf. Edward Hirsch is an award-winning poet and the president of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. He's in his 70s now, and he has retinitis pigmentosa, a hereditary eye disease. He found that as his eyesight dimmed, he discovered something unexpected: exhilaration. He says that blindness has made him feel more alive, more curious, more focused, and more connected to the world in ways he never imagined. Back to our conversation. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how, say, New York City is laid out or the technology that's used in the world around you, like what would be a really, really helpful change in technology or design, street design, anything like that? What comes to mind?
Everyone loves restaurants that are just really, really dark. I'm virtually blind in them. My constant joke with my friends is, could we eat in a gas station? I'll see everyone. If you don't have a disability like this, you just don't basically, it's not even mean, you just don't understand. So, for example, when I go and give a poetry reading, which I still do, and I tell them I'm legally blind, could you have better light at the podium? They do, but it's not enough light for me to see. I have to bring my own lamps. Subway stairs, the lights are often out. I can't see the stairs. And then the other thing, I suppose, is that I would enforce electric bikes not going one way the wrong way. They assume that you'll see them. And I almost got killed a few times without my cane. Now they'll get my cane, but not me.
You had brought up earlier about sort of this division point where once you accepted the fact that you had this condition, that you were either going to despair or you were going to go in the other direction and develop your curiosity and sense of presence and be willing to do all you can to empower yourself. And so I think about those who maybe find this interview via a Google search and they are beginning to wrap their heads around their reality that's the same condition. I know you can't tell anyone how to feel, and your essay and talking with me and being open about your condition is part of lighting the way, so to speak, for people who are just coming to grips with this. But if you could say something to someone who's at that division point, what would you say? Is there anything you would say to them that maybe you wish you had heard, even though you did accomplish it on your own and continue to?
First of all, I don't think this only applies to blindness. It applies to all kinds of other things that happen to everyone, and all kinds of things happen to people. There are stages of this like everything else, and I think that if anyone feels grief about this, they should go ahead and feel their grief. But for example, when I was training with my cane coach, I said how much I didn't like going out in the rain because everyone was running around with umbrellas and it was hard to handle an umbrella and a cane and a bag. I said, well, what do most people do who are blind or going blind? She goes, they don't go out. They just stay home. I go, well, I have another idea. I think I'll just get a raincoat. Some people just never get over their shame, and I think are hampered for the rest of their lives, and they just withdraw more and more. That's hurtful to yourself. I think blindness, deafness, all of these things correlate with increased dementia. They correlate with increased social isolation. They correlate with all kinds of mental illness. And so if you can find it inside yourself, you should lean in. For example, first, did not want to go to the gym. Too difficult. Once I started using the cane, now everyone at the gym, they just think it's hilarious. They think I'm an inspiration. I go, why am I an inspiration? My workouts are not that tough. Believe me. They go, well, if the guy with the cane can come to work out, so can we. So if the choice is denial or stopping doing the things that you love, or admitting you have a disability and going forward to be able to do the things you love, to continue to do the things you love, to participate in the world in the way you want to participate, then lean in. Some people choose despair over curiosity. Can't blame them for doing that. But I believe that a kind of going forth with optimism and adjusting and being part of the world is a better way to be in the world. And you will feel better about yourself if you can find your way into doing that. And if the choice is staying in and not seeing anyone, or going out and admitting you need to use a cane, I'd say go out and use the cane. And then when you do, you start finding out that people have a brother who's blind and a sister who's blind and a cousin who's blind, and they have hearing issues. And you just start finding out about all kinds of things as you join the world. You also discover that you're part of a community, and that community is often very ticked off. The world is not accommodating to people. And I understand that. I understand how people advocate for disabled rights and why we need that, why people need that. But I'd say that it's better to be part of the world and admitting your disability, whatever it is, and participating than to withdraw and turn away from the world that you once belonged to.
All right. Well, I would love if you would end our conversation by sharing your poem, A Baker Swept By.
A baker swept by. You were already losing your eyesight last winter in Rome when you paused in the doorway at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and a baker swept by on a shiny bicycle, waving a cap and singing under his breath. You didn't know bakers wore white aprons dusted with flour and floated around the city like angels on a freshly baked day. You weren't sure why morning halted up and down the street as you stood in the doorway and a baker winged by on a weekend morning so new and pristine that you looked into the sky and for one undiminished instant of misplaced time, you saw brightness everywhere, before a shadow crossed the rooftops, and it was blotted out.
Edward Hirsch, thank you so much for talking with me.
My great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Edward Hirsch's latest collection of poems is called Stranger by Night. If you subscribe to the Audacious podcast feed, you'll notice a short bonus track right next to this one. It features Christine Ha answering some deliciously original questions from one of her biggest fans, my friend Ashley Cook. Like this one.
What meal would you curate for Brat Girl Summer?
This also is the second episode we've done about visual impairments. The first one features the founder of World Access for the Blind, Daniel Kish. When he was a baby, he lost both of his eyes to cancer, and ever since then, he's used sonar to navigate the world, and now he gets around, including on a bicycle, by making clicking noises in his mouth.
The click is almost an embodiment of all the sounds we could make, all rolled into one piercing, penetrating pulse.
We'll have a link at ctpublic.org/audacious, or you can find it on your favorite podcast app. This show is always so lovingly produced by Jessica Severin DeMartinez, Meg Fitzgerald, Robin Doyon-Aitken, and Meg Dalton at Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford. Stay in touch with me on the socials at Kyone Wolf, and you can always send an email to audacious@ctpublic.org. Thanks for listening.